be with Jim. I think most of you heard from the chat earlier. We started, I met Jim many years ago, and truly he's been, I would say, the most influential educator as me as a leader and a trainer. I have to tell you, anybody who's out there, you have to get his books. I found only on my shelf right now, only 6 of them right now. So those of you, I will give you the link for everything, for all his books. This book was amazing, Better Conversations. I could talk about that later. So I'm just going to start off. You can Google Jim and just find everything about his accolades. I just want everyone to know that he's a good, kind person, that the number of times that I've reached out for any question or just to say hello, he immediately responds. And to me, that's more important than the educator is the heart. So I'm so glad Jim's here. And I guess we're just going to start off saying, how did you come to study instructional coaching?
First off, it is great to see you both. Nancy, it's been a few years, and but it only seems like a few minutes, so it's great to see you. Chanel, you're a big part of our family's life, great friend of Jenny's and mine, and so I'm truly just happy to be here to see both your smiling faces. You're both of you forces for good in the world, and it's really great to see you. So we don't even have to do this to have a conversation. We should have more conversations.
Exactly.
So how it got started, I went to Kansas to do my doctorate. I grew up in Canada and was a teacher in Canada and worked mostly in community college. And I got I decided I was going to go to Kansas for my doctorate and was working on a research project. And we're sitting around the table, and the research project involved learning a teaching practice. And it was really about how to use inclusive teaching practices in technology classes. And we're sitting there and we said, you know, if we're going to get teachers to use these practices, we're going to have to describe them for them one-to-one, and we're going to have to model in the classroom. We're going to have to observe and provide feedback. We're going to have to meet them and help them adapt it and make it work. I mean, a workshop, we know it's not going to work. And someone at the table, I don't know who, it might have been me, but somebody at the table said, well, if we know that's true here, why don't we do it all the time? And then that day we started to talk about, well, what would real professional development look like that really leads to change? And we started with a thing called learning consulting. So in the late 90s, from about 96 on, we had a grant and we had learning consultants in school. Then in 1999, we got what's called Gear Up funding. And we changed the name to an instructional collaborator, which is actually a term I like a lot. But at that time, there was a real emphasis on literacy coaches and reading coaches. And around 2003, I said, oh, we should change the name to instructional coach. And we changed the name to instructional coach. Then I wrote an article for the Journal of Staff Development, which was the first one to really talk about instructional coaching, and then wrote the book Instructional Coaching. And the rest is history. We've been studying it ever since, trying to figure out how can we really get good at this work of providing support and helping teachers, you know, unleash their potential.
I know when you talk about coaching, what are some of the different approaches to coaching in schools that you've seen? Because you hear about coaching and sometimes people get confused between the different approaches. How would you explain the differences?
This is the new thing. This is the thing I've never explained to anybody ever before. So I'm excited to explain it. Parts of it I've explained, but I think I've been trying to answer that question for a long time. But the first thing is there are different ways that a professional developer can interact. And so let's just loosely put coaches in the category of professional developer. Usually coaches, like if you did cognitive coaching or growth coaching, they're going to take a facilitative approach. And so that kind of a coach, the coach who's a facilitative coach, doesn't give advice, doesn't give suggestions, and really facilitates the thinking of the coach. A cognitive coach, for example, would really even be facilitating how the person being coached thinks. They're helping them think more clearly. And in an approach like the growth model from my friends in Australia, Growth Coaching International, or the Grow model that Sir John Whitmore developed, in that approach, you know, what you're helping the person do is get really clear on an issue and you're helping them set goals and make plans to implement the goals, but you don't really give them advice. You don't give them suggestions. And the argument would be, if you do, you take away their capacity to solve their own problems. And often when you look at literature on, this is one of 6 boxes, Nancy, just so you know. So often when you look at the literature on coaching, facilitative coaching is contrasted with directive coaching. So directive coaching is kind of the opposite of facilitative coaching. I know stuff. I'm going to come in your classroom. I'm going to tell you what you did right. I'm going to tell you what you did wrong. I'm going to give you some suggestions on how to improve. And sometimes in directive coaching, there's a body of literature I'm helping people learn, like it could be a set of reading strategies. But I'm an expert, and I share my expertise with you, and I'm directive. I'm telling you what to do. In the facilitative approach, the decision maker essentially is the teacher. In the directive approach, the thinker is in many ways the coach. In the facilitative approach, the assumption is this person already knows what to do. But in the directive approach, this person doesn't know what they need to do, and I need to tell them how to do it. Well, there's a whole lot of research on human motivation that would say when you do complex work like teaching, a directive approach isn't going to be welcomed. Right? It's too complex, it's oversimplifying it, and creates dependent teachers, because pretty quickly they'll say something to the effect of, well, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. So in between the facilitative approach and the directive approach is the dialogical approach. And the dialogical approach is where we still position the teacher as the decision maker. We still don't give them advice or tell them what to do, but we do share our expertise, but we share it dialogically, which is to say we share it as an option. So let's say a teacher is trying to figure out what are they going to do to increase engagement in their class. We might say, and we can see that they've hit a wall. You know, we might say something like, is it okay with you if I share a few things I'm thinking? And the person will say, oh, that'd be great, because I really don't know what to do. Other times, when you take the dialogical approach, I don't have to share that. I can stay facilitative. But it's helpful if a person is trying to figure out how to do formative assessment and the coach has expertise at formative assessment. It's helpful if the coach can share it in a way that still positions the teacher as the decision maker. That's dialogue. Dialogue is balancing advocacy with inquiry. It's basically balancing telling with asking. That's what happens in the dialogical approach. So you could start facilitative, but it's helpful to have a coach who can go to dialogical. And I'd say when you take the dialogical approach, your assumption is this person probably has a lot of really valuable information, but it's going to be helpful if they hit a wall, if they need help, that I've got expertise that I can share. So we don't show up as experts, but we have expertise. That's the dialogical approach. So 3 different approaches: facilitative, dialogical, directive. So are you with me so far? Is it making sense?
It does, because a facilitative, I think I read someplace where you said it's more like a sounding board, where, and then when you're moving, the teacher has lost decision-making let's say process in terms of more the directive. And now we're looking, I see more the connections when it comes to the dialogue, that the coach wouldn't just be adding the expertise, they wait to see what the teacher has to offer.
Right. The directive approach, the metaphor would be an apprentice and a master.
That's what I read, right.
And the metaphor for the dialogical approach would be a partner. And so the dialogical coach may share information, but only if it's helpful. Yes. And what I say is the dialogical approach, you don't take sides. I have an idea here, but I'm not trying to talk you into my idea. Let's make a list of all the possible things, and you pick the one you think is right. And then if I think there's concerns, I don't try to persuade them to do something. I'm not trying to take them somewhere. I'm just trying to help them think it through. But it seems crazy for me to withhold that expertise. So I share it in a way that positions them into the decision. So those are my first 3 boxes, okay? Facilitative, dialogical, directive. Now the next 3 boxes are mentor, trainer, coach.
Right.
So a mentor or a trainer or a coach could take the facilitative or the directive or the dialogical approach. So any of those 3 things. If the mentor takes the directive approach, the mentor tells people what to do. They're an expert. They share. In some ways, it kind of looks like that, or it's some kind of combination. But mentoring, the way I'm describing it, and I'm not an expert on mentoring. I haven't read all the literature, so it could be untrue. But the mentor is responding to a need. So my Christian Van Nuremberg, he says, someone pulls up and says, can you tell me how to drive my car down to City Hall? The person who gets asked the question probably shouldn't say, well, in other times when you tried to find your way down to City Hall, how have you solved that problem? They should probably say, go down the street 6 blocks, turn right. And so right now, I'm getting a lot of mentoring help because I'm learning how to use technology I haven't used before. And I don't really want the person to just show me how to do, Flipgrid. I just need to learn how to do it. So that's mentoring. And training is also, we will call it implementation support. Training is where what the coach is doing is helping a person learn a program. So maybe it's gradual release, the I do it, we do it, you do it, or maybe it's Socratic seminar, restorative justice. But the trainer could take a facilitative or a directive or a dialogical approach. Now, in all these things, we tend to think the dialogical approach makes sense because you honor the capacity of the person to think. And you help them solve their own problem. If you tell them what to do, you create dependency. And then the third thing is coaching. And coaching is really goal directed. It's not about a practice. We've set a goal, the teacher set a goal. It's probably 1-to-1 usually. And in the mentoring and the training approach, it's an expert talking with a novice. But in the coaching approach, it's usually a peer talking to a peer. We might have different roles. I'm a coach and you're a teacher, but we have the same power in the relationship. And the mentoring and the training part is usually short term. I'm going to show you how to do this thing.
Short term. Yep.
I'm going to help you learn this strategy. Whereas coaching potentially could be ongoing. It has the potential to be ongoing.
And it seems like it respects the autonomy. It respects the autonomy of the educator.
Well, it could, but it could also be directive. So it could be dialogical, directive, or philosophical. All three of these different approaches. And what people do is they confuse the role, am I a trainer, a mentor, or a coach, with the approach. And so they say, I'm a mentor, whereas you have to think through what's the right approach and what's the role. And of course, you could jump between roles. You could be in different places at different times. If I'm a technology coach, sometimes I might do a dialogical approach to coaching, but sometimes I just might mentor people on let me fix the problem with you, So,
and it's
so that's my long answer. I should have checked to see how many participants we had before we started and then what it dropped down to afterwards, but that's my long answer.
They're still there.
But I think this gives you a way of saying, well, what is it we need to do? And I'm of the opinion that the dialogical approach makes the most sense because you're empowering the person and you're sharing expertise. But people have to figure out if it works, keep doing whatever you're doing.
Well, it's the partnership. I think that's one of the foundations when I look at your work. A lot of when looking at the chat, some people are asking about how do you maintain this relationship, knowing what's happening in schools on a digital platform, knowing that it's the connections, knowing it's relationships that you have with your instructional coach. How do you maintain this digitally or in a virtual context?
Well, I think there's a big I don't know that has to be the first thing you say because we don't even really know what's happening, and people don't know if their roles will be the same next year. They don't know if they're going back to school or if it's going to be some blended model of remote plus face-to-face. Some kids come, some kids don't. I know I don't know. Can you get across the border into Luxembourg freely now? I know Switzerland you couldn't cross. Yeah.
No, we can't get across. Belgian border is still closed. So they're hoping they would open soon, but not yet.
So I know the same thing in Switzerland. People coming from France couldn't. It's people who live in Geneva or work in Geneva live in Switzerland. They can't get across. They can't even bike across the border. So. So there's so much uncertainty, but I think that the first thing remotely is you're probably going to do a lot more mentoring than you ordinarily would do. So we did a survey of coaches. It's not a scientific survey, really. We just put a message out on Twitter, and we kept hounding people and asked them to fill in the survey. We got 177 people responded. And mostly what people are doing is sort of helping people figure out how to plan their curriculum in a remote environment, about 25%. And so people aren't really doing it. They're really putting the fires out. But once people have mastered technology, once they can do Padlet and Flipgrid and Menti, and they can do all the different forms of technology they're going to use for their instruction, all the different Google approaches, Google Classroom, for example. Once they've got that down, then you're going to be able to move to a more coaching kind of thing. And then it's going to be more, let's watch a video of your lesson. Let's talk about what's working, what's not working. How can you integrate more connection with your kids? How can you do more formative assessment? There's a group of people who came together and are continuing to meet. With our last meeting's coming up, and they're creating a playbook for remote learning. And so that's, we listed about 100 different tools for remote learning, and then narrowed it down to the 20 most highest yield. And it's going to be, we're going to release it. It's free. Anybody can use it however they want to do it. And all I did was have the idea. Everybody else did the work. But that tool will become something that coaches use, I think, pretty frequently. It'll be their go-to playbook about remote learning. But I think the other thing about this time is everybody is going through stress, and they don't have words for the stress. This has been my theme the last couple of weeks. So they'll feel they'll be working and they'll feel their jaw really all clenched up, and they're not even aware of the fact they're stressed. They don't even realize it. They don't have words for it. And the coaches are doing the same thing. And so I think we have to approach people with a really large amount of grace, because we don't even know what's going on inside ourselves, let alone outside ourselves. So it's such an unpredictable time.
I had someone write to me directly. This is the book, everyone, that I used when I was thinking about first working with filming teachers. So really an excellent resource. And I just put the link in the chat as well for some of the resources. When I heard you talking here, how are coaching conversations different than other conversations that you have with another teacher? How do you see the difference between coaching conversations different than other conversations?
Yeah, I would say, let's talk about the dialogical kind of coaching conversation, which is where we would go. And facilitative is very similar. The conversation is about, you read different definitions, but it's about helping people unleash their potential, helping them realize. So everything you're doing is really focused on helping that person succeed. It as again, Christian says, it's not about me. It's about the other person. And so when you're in the conversation, there's no element of it that should be about you. It should be about, how can I help this other person succeed? And so that's there in the kind of questions you ask. So if you take the facilitative or dialogical approach, I don't ask a question to get somebody to do something. I don't have my mind made up. This is what you need to do. And so I'm not trying to get buy-in. What I'm trying to do is partner with you and think it through with you, one professional talking to another. I think if I go into a conversation with a professional and I figure I've got it all figured out and they just have to do what I say, I'm not treating that person as a professional, because what professionals do is they decide for themselves, this is what I need to do. So the way I listen, I don't ask questions where I know the answer to them. I don't ask questions to manipulate people. I just take them as partner. However, I don't silence myself if I've got something that might be useful, but I always offer it as a tentative suggestion. I say, let me share something I'm wondering. What do you think about this? And if I'm doing my job well, the person should know I'm not trying to persuade them. We're just brainstorming here. We're just trying to figure it out. We're trying to figure out what we can do. And both of our brains count. If you had two people getting together to design something or plan something, and they were just two friends trying to figure out, what should we eat at the dinner party? They could go back and forth, and it could really be a situation. Well, what if we tried this, and what about that? And that's kind of what you're striving for, recognizing that you want the other person to do most of the talking.
And I guess that somebody was writing in the chat as well. If you could think what do coaches need to be successful, what would be a skill set that you feel that is essential in order for this partnership to be promoted?
Right. Well, first off, just there's a blog I've got called radicallearners.com,
Right
and
now.
there are tons of free resources and videos, all kinds of stuff on radicallearners.com. So, for example, there's 8 videos on the partnership principles. So there's an introductory one, and there's videos on the impact cycle, and then on our website, instructionalcoaching.com. I'm not trying to promote it. It's just that there's a ton of free stuff. So if you go to the resources section and you click on support for books, the main coaching book is the impact cycle, and you can watch a whole elementary and a whole secondary coaching cycle from start to finish. There's videos and about 100 forms. You can download them all. And if you can download it, you can share it. The only thing we don't want you to do is sell it, but you can share it to other people. So there's a lot of stuff there. So I would say coaching, you could sort of think about it as having 4 elements. So, it's education. So we need a Venn diagram. So if you can imagine a Venn diagram, the first circle is way of being. And so an effective coach approaches people, we would say, as a partner. And they're curious. And probably most important, they really want what's best for the other person. They approach the person with humility, and they communicate to the person that they believe in you. They have faith in the person. Paulo Freire says, if those 3 things are present, trust will follow. That is, humility, communicate, I really believe in you. I have faith in you. And I genuinely want what's good for you. And when those 3 things are in place, trust will follow. Yeah. So that's a way of being. Second thing is you need some kind of process. Now we use what's called the impact cycle, and it's kind of a generic process for change. We identify a picture of reality, we identify a goal, we identify a strategy, we learn the strategy, and then we implement and make adaptations. And we walk the teacher through that process. Sir John Whitmore would say it's GROW. So goals, reality, options, and the way forward. And I like the growth coaching model, which extends that a little bit to add tactics and habits and modifies it. Third thing is coaching skills. How well do you listen? How well do you ask questions? How well do you paraphrase what you've heard? How well do you notice your colleague? And how well do you clarify what's going on? And so there's going to be coaching skills. And better conversations to some extent is really getting at many of those things, demonstrating empathy, finding common ground. And then if you're a facilitative coach, that's it. Those are the 3 big areas. But if you're an instructional coach, a 4th area is strategic knowledge. So I have a playbook of teaching practices that are high leverage, highly effective, and that playbook continuously gets revised in the school. And then I have an understanding of data. I know what data to gather so we can set goals and monitor progress. So my way of being, my process, my coaching skills, my strategic knowledge, those are the things a coach needs to develop over time.
You mentioned goals, and this is one area that I thought, I know the impact within the teachers that I worked with. Can you describe your peers' goals? Because I think that's such a strong, it's a shift, because it's the first time that I've seen goals that actually mentions the word student within the framework.
Yeah, well, first off, when we started out, if you read the book Instructional Coaching, we don't even really talk about goals. It's just about let's just learn the strategy, see what happens. And it became really clear in the way we did our research, working with coaches, first off in Beaverton, Oregon. Michelle Harris was a part of that team. I know you both know Michelle. Yeah. It became really clear we needed goals. And so Michelle had trained in SMART goals. So she said, let's try out SMART goals. And SMART goals were a step forward, but the trouble with SMART goals is they left some things out, and also the timely thing doesn't work so well. Timely is great. If what I want to do is I want to do a Marie Kondo on my house and like make it all like beautifully organized. I can say I'm going to do that by July 14th. That's my deadline. Or I'm going to do a weight training or something. I can set a timely goal if I'm the only variable. But if I have 26 students and I'm trying to hit a goal, the timely goal is kind of a shot in the dark. I mean, you can use timely to mean let's break down what we're going to do when we're going to do it. And then just a few other things. We think that we have to make sure the goal is powerful. That is, it's going to make a socially significant difference in kids' lives. And then the goal is either easy or efficient. This is the first E. Some people don't like the word easy. They think it trivializes the goal. But if it's a powerful goal, the best kind is one that's really going to make a huge difference. It's not that hard to do. And then it needs to be one that matters to the teacher. It's emotionally compelling. If the teacher doesn't care about the goal, they're probably not going to do it. They'll do a bare minimum, maybe. They'll comply, but they won't roll up their sleeves and get all in.
No.
But if you pick a goal where they say, oh man, if we could fix that, that'd be great. I've been trying to do that. You know, when you've got a goal they really care about, then you've got a chance to have something happen. And then the R part in peers is it's reachable, which is to say we have a clearly defined finish line. We know where we're trying to get to. Heath and Heath say sometimes resistance is just lack of clarity. So we've gotten really clear on what should be different if we hit our goal. And that's a really important thing. Let's really play that out. That's why the coaches need to understand data. Yeah. And we've identified a strategy to get there. And hope involves those things. If you want somebody who has hope, they have to have a destination they want. They have to see a pathway to that goal. And they have to believe they can get there. And if any of those three things are missing, so in many ways what a coach does with peers goals is they give teachers hope. And the last point is we found you need a student-focused goal. The trouble with a teacher-focused goal is you don't know if it worked, you know? So we implemented this new way of questioning, but did it have any impact? Did it make any difference? And so when you set a student-focused goal, you're saying this thing really has to work. And the other thing about a student-focused goal is it becomes an objective standard for excellence. If it's just, how do you feel about the strategy? Oh, I think I've done it. I've implemented it. I've tried it. I've hit my goal. But if you have the student-focused goal, you have to keep working until you hit the goal. And the reality is, the first time you implement something, it usually doesn't work. It has to be tweaked and modified. You know, it's your worst version of it, too.
Yes.
So we would say powerful, easy, emotionally compelling, reachable, student-focused. Those are variables. But if you're in a school where you've already got SMART goals as your thing, I wouldn't say just get rid of SMART goals. I would say just take the peers acronym and think about it in the context of peers goals. Do we have an emotionally compelling goal? Are we asking questions that really ask the teacher if they really care about it? And have we identified a strategy? And is it student focused? You can do that. You could sort of purify a SMART goal, you know.
I'm looking at the chat and there's questions about twofold. Number one, we have many teachers that are being really, they're looking into instructional coaches to become an instructional coach. What would you think would be what would be your suggestion of how you move from a classroom teacher for someone who's really considering becoming an instructional coach?
First off, that blog, Radical Learners, let's do the free route first. So how do you do it when it doesn't cost you any money? So if you go to Radical Learners and you just poke around the blog, there are dozens of things that lay out the information. Then probably the book to read, if it's instructional coaching, would be the impact cycle. That's the process we follow. But you could figure that out by looking at the website and looking at and you could probably also watch the videos of the coaching cycle that are in the resources section. But then, you know, we're just offering more and more remote courses. There are 6 free webinars, so they could look at all the webinars. They're all free. They're on the website, instructionalcoaching.com. And then there's courses you can pay for. So, so I'd say there are lots of ways of learning the skills of an instructional coach.
Training. And I guess another question that came up was, if there's a school, you have some teachers who are like, I want this to happen at my school. What needs to be institutionalized, or what needs to be a priority in a school in order to have instructional coaching become part of their practice? Because I have some teachers saying, we don't have it, but we want it. What should we do? How do we get our school involved?
So there are many international schools who are starting to do a really good job of this. Somerset College outside of Gold Coast has got a vibrant coaching program. Brighton Boys Grammar in Melbourne has got one. Your school, I think, is developing one. You could probably answer this question better than me. Gordon School in Brussels.
In Brussels.
I just watched a dissertation where a researcher talked through kind of many of the successes they're having in Brussels in terms of making it work. My quick answer would be, you need a learning architecture in a system. And learning architecture is like a nervous system for knowledge. And so, you know, if the nerves in my hands didn't connect back to my brain, if there's a break there, then I wouldn't be able to feel with my hands. But in a nervous system, everything's connected. And so what my fingers do is going to touch my brain, and, you know, all my whole body's connected through the nervous system. And so a learning architecture, and I write about this in the book I'm writing about right now, learning architecture is a way in which we make sure that the headmasters or the principals and the coaches and the teachers and the leaders, everybody is connected. And so everybody has the knowledge they need, but there's a system. So a coach should be learning more than just about anybody else. The only other people comparable would probably be, well, I guess everybody should be learning, but kids should be learning and teachers should be learning. But the coach is seeing so many different examples of classrooms. And so the coach is going to be picking up a lot of information. And you want a system where if one coach learns, oh, this is a really cool way of doing this teaching strategy, that everybody can know right away. And so there has to be a system for sharing that knowledge. And the flip side is everybody has to have an understanding of what a coach does. So we would say the coach needs a champion, and the champion needs somebody who supports them. And the person who supports the champion likely needs a support outside of the system. Right. Now, in a smaller school, in a smaller system, if you only have one school or a couple schools, the champion is the director or whoever supports the coaching program. But that everybody needs to have someone they could go to if they're struggling, or they can say, hey, because to have just workshops to develop coaching seems kind of almost ironic. Like, wouldn't we want to have, since we know coaching is important for teachers, don't we think coaches need coaching too?
And it's ongoing. It's something that's embedded in the culture of the professional learning at that school.
Right. So this idea of the playbook is that what that is that's a receptacle for organizational knowledge about instruction. So the playbook identifies, in our system, we think these are our most important teaching practices. These are the high yield teaching practices. But over time, you keep learning. So you might say, oh, I thought this thing was going to be really helpful, but actually this would be a better way of approaching it. Or if someone goes off to a conference and they come back with an idea, or over time you're using checklists to describe the practices really precisely, but as you work with teachers, you realize, oh, we need to modify this checklist. So your playbook, once you create it, becomes something you continuously revise based on your knowledge about what good teaching looks like. So you're structuring in learning, and then that knowledge is shared through your learning architecture, which is, to some extent, that could just happen through face-to-face meetings. But I think what I see happening is we hire coaches and we train them, but the headmaster or principal doesn't really know what they're supposed to do and has a slightly different understanding of it. And without the support of administration, it's hard for the coach to flourish. So you really need that coherence, to put it all together.
How many principals attend? How do you get the principal on board? Like, I guess my question, I'm going to take 2 steps back. Out of all your workshops that you present, what percentage of principals, because as you just mentioned, they're key in moving instructional coaches forward. Do you see a large percentage of principals attending your workshops or other type of professional learning?
Not a large percentage, but I would say in settings where the program is really going to flourish, it's highly likely the principals will attend quite a bit of it. And even possibly the superintendent. There has to be a recognition, like there has to be an understanding of how important professional learning is. And this coach is going to be, they're the person that's going to kind of make it happen.
But you need that.
We also do work on helping principals become coaches. Now, a principal isn't a coach the same as a coach is a coach, but they can be kind of coachy. So they can take a coaching approach, so they can ask better questions, they can become better listeners, they can make the conversations they have with teachers more like coaching conversations rather than just directive conversations. So we found it's helpful if if the principals start to understand what coaching looks like, it's better for them to be able to, it's easier for them to support the coach.
Yeah. One question that came up that relates is, what are the various ways to measure the impact of coaching in a school? And I know this came up with another question where some schools are saying, right now, financially, this is a challenging time for, I know some international schools, due to there's such uncertainty with admissions. And sometimes you have leadership looking at positions or programs to cut. So the
Right.
follow-up question is, how do you measure then to prove that coaching impacts the teaching and learning of the educator?
Right. So again, this is something I'm writing about in this new book, but you can measure how many cycles the coach is involved in. You can measure how many goals were set and how many goals were hit, and document the data. Now, if the coaches aren't coaching, you're not going to be able to do that. So sometimes coaches spend an awful lot of time building relationships, putting out fires, but they're not actually coaching. Now, this is a bit of a unique time right now because of the virus and everything. And right now, coaches are doing superhuman work to help teachers just get through. If ever there was a time to prove the value and importance of coaches, it's right now, because coaches are just run off their feet trying to provide support in many cases. And they have to learn themselves. But you can gather data on goals set, goals hit, cycles. I think it's helpful for the coach to document how they use their time. And if you use Excel or some spreadsheet software, you can pretty quickly pump out a pie chart that says, this is how I've been using my time. On the Radical Learners blog, Chris Monroe from Melbourne, who's a growth coaching person, he created a survey that we adapted slightly, and you can use it to get feedback from teachers on their experiences with the coaches. So I think keeping track of how you use your time, the number of people you work with, the goals you set, the goals you hit. But to me, if you wanted like a one-sentence answer, the answer is, if you're setting and hitting goals with teachers, you're probably successful. If that's not happening, then something has to change.
Right. When looking at all the experience you have with coaches, what is the one skill that you have seen that, regardless of where you are geographically, is always an area that needed to be further developed when it comes to coaching? So you could be in the United States or Europe that you're like, wow, this is an area that coaches really need to focus on to be successful.
Okay, if I've got the question, I think what skating is to ice hockey, listening is to coaches. If you're not a good listener, you're probably not going to be a really effective coach.
Right.
So I'd say listening is the area that coaches have to flourish at. And to really be a good listener is really almost countercultural, you know. But when you're talking to somebody who's really listening, there'll be a moment where you feel, oh yeah, you've got it. That's exactly what I'm dealing with. And you feel like they get you. And that builds a lot of trust, I think. But it's hard to think with a person if you don't know what they're saying. And if you're just interrupting and telling them what to do and completing their sentences and making suggestions, you're not really coaching. So my quick answer would be listening.
I remember working with Michelle, and we used Better Conversations with our teacher leaders, and that made a difference in terms of how they listen and their approaches to listening. So anybody out there, Better Conversations, I would say, is a pillar when working with instructional coaches. The one area that I thought made one of the biggest impacts when it came to looking at connections was the partnership principles. And we have about 400 people out there. Some of them might not be familiar with the partnership principles and the work how it works with instructional coaches.
Right. That's probably a better answer than listening, actually, the partnership principles. There's 7 principles. They're described all over the place if you just Google it, but they're really on the Radical Learners is where you get the most information, because there's about 7 videos or 8 videos. But the first principle, and they grew out of reading pretty widely in literature in a lot of different contexts, everything from philosophy of science to cultural anthropology, and business writers like Peter Block. And so I summarized these, and then my dissertation was really about what happens when you take the partnership approach versus when you take a directive approach. And if you go to our website, instructionalcoaching.com, click on research, you can download the paper that I presented at the American Educational Research Association about that research, if you just can't help yourself. But equality is really, I approach the other person with humility. Equality kind of gets a bad rap right now because it's contrasted with equity, and so there's a famous picture of equality.
Yes.
There's these kids looking and people looking into a sporting event, and says equality on one side and equity on the other. But what I mean by equality isn't that we treat each other the same. What I'm saying is we believe each other has the same value, or a simpler way to put it is, I don't think I'm better than you. And when we start to see the other person as a human being who counts, that's equality, then equity becomes inevitable. And if we don't see other people as equal, then the kind of really horrible and inequitable things that are happening in the United States are happening. Once we start to not see that person as important as me, I can treat them in dehumanizing and in some cases horrible ways. But equality is I approach the other person as an equal. I think they count the same. And I think in order to have equity, you have to have a belief that every person counts, you know. Right. And just to go back to that picture, which I do think treating everybody the same is a problem. I agree with that completely. But we're really being equitable. They shouldn't be looking over the fence. They should be at the game. They should be in there watching. The second thing is choice, that I think the other person should be able to make a lot of decisions about what they do. You know, Donald Miller says, control is the opposite of love. And so when I give people choice, what I'm doing is I'm honoring their capacity to think for themselves. It's our ability to say no that allows us to say yes, as Peter Block says. If I can't say no, then yes doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't mean you can do everything. You know, you can't say I'm not really a morning person. I'm going to start teaching around noon. I mean, no. You gotta. There are things you have to do in any system. But the more autonomy you have, the more we're recognizing you as a professional. And the third thing is voice, which is that I feel like my opinion matters. Whether it's a one-to-one conversation or whatever it might be, there's a sense in which a person's voice matters. And when you put equality, choice, and voice together, you get dialogue. Well, I should say about voice too, it also applies to students. Russ Qualia's research shows that when kids have a voice, they're 7 times more likely to succeed than when they don't have a voice. And his research also shows, or at least he told me this in a conference, I haven't read it, but he told me that when teachers have a voice, kids have a voice. When teachers don't have a voice, kids don't have a voice. So when teachers have a voice, kids have a voice. When kids have a voice, they're 7 times more likely to succeed. And those 3 things lead to dialogue, which is a back and forth flowing of information, a meeting of the minds, thinking together. It's where your ideas and my ideas, we're thinking together. I'm not trying to persuade you. You're not trying to persuade me. We're exploring things, and that leads to reflection, real life thinking in the moment, and then a funny word, praxis. But praxis is learning in action. We're not just talking about questioning in the abstract. We're saying, how can we take questioning today and help us be better teachers tomorrow? Like in tomorrow's classroom, what are we going to do? We're grounding our knowledge in real life. This is one of the reasons why coaching is so important, because without trying it out in real life, it doesn't really work. And then the last thing is reciprocity. It's the old saying, when one teaches, 2 learn. It's expecting it to be a 2-way. Going into the conversation as a learner is really what reciprocity is about.
So those of you out there, see the resources. I put the link in the chat to have access to everything that Jim just noted. There was a question, Jim, about in some schools, instructional coaches are getting some challenge because they're not teaching, and other colleagues are saying, you are supposed to be helping me,
right,
but you're not in the classroom. So how would you respond to something like that?
Well, I think being really clear on the role of the coach is really important. It's important for whomever the coach reports to, a headmaster or a principal or whoever it is, a curriculum director. They have to be clear on what the coach does and doesn't do. So we suggest you list all the possible roles and how much time should be spent on it. And then it needs to be communicated widely. This is what we do. This is how we do it. I think the bottom line for coaches is firstly that partnership approach.
Yeah.
If people feel this person believes in me and wants me to succeed and approaches me with humility, I'm way more likely to support them than if they show up like an expert to tell me what I did right and what I did wrong.
Yeah.
And because the truth is, our advice, as Michael Bungay Stanier says, it's not as good as we think, you know. And there's a Marcus Buckingham Harvard Business Review article recently about feedback, which said basically our observation feedback is usually wrong. So when teachers complain, that's not what's really happening. They're probably right. But even if the feedback is right, because of perceptual errors, often the person can't hear it. So you need a coaching conversation to move things forward. But I would say if the coach is really helping teachers save time and reach more kids, then people will be supporting the coach.
Yeah.
If the coach is kind of pushing and not respecting the teacher and not really hearing the teacher and not providing powerful tools to help them succeed, then they're gonna be more likely to run up against resistance. But I think the proof is in setting goals and hitting goals, really help reaching more kids, saving teachers time.
And you mentioned before about the cycle, and that was a question about if you could elaborate a little bit more, you know, about the, you know, talking about the current reality, and then you move into the idea of learning and then going into improve. If you could give some more detail about that.
Sure. So we start by trying to get a clear picture of current reality. We've found the easiest way to do that is video. Video is quick and it's clean, and video helps us get beyond our defense mechanisms and our perceptual errors if we're a teacher. And when people watch a video, they go, oh, I didn't realize that was happening. And it's kind of mind-blowing sometimes, like 35% of the class time might be wasted time. And watch the video and you go, oh, gee, I had no idea. So then we set a goal. The goal is a peer's goal. So now we say to the teacher, it's probably a good, like they're in charge. So we say, you know, do you want to use video? Not everybody likes video. Actually, nobody likes video. But some people will see the value of it. And other people say, no, I don't want to watch video. You know, I've been home I just been sitting on the couch watching Netflix, watched every Doctor Who episode twice. You know, I've gained so much weight. I don't want to see the video. So we said, what about audio? I could audio record the class, or I could script what happens, or I could interview the students, or we could look at student work, or I could do an observation, gather data to get a clear picture of current reality. The trouble with just looking at student work, though, you're going to miss out on how much wasted time there is, how much teacher talk versus student talk there is. There are a lot of things you don't see if you only look at student work. So probably the ideal scenario, well, some combination. Interviewing kids is really telling too. And in some ways, it takes more courage to listen to the kids in interviews. But you get a clear picture of current reality, and then we have a set of questions that we use, really based on solution-focused coaching, although we didn't know it at the time. They just kind of evolved, but they're kind of like solution-focused. So I say something like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how close is that class to your ideal? And why'd you give it that number? And what would have to change to make it closer to a 10? And you know, what's a goal you could set for that? And if you could set that goal, would you really want to do it? And how would you measure it? And then, okay, let's talk about what the strategy might be that you would use to hit the goal. So at the end of the identify stage, we've got a clear picture of reality. We have a powerful, emotionally compelling, student-focused goal. And we've identified a teaching strategy. And that's where the coach can sometimes be really helpful, because the teacher will say, well, look, if I knew what to do, I'd be doing it. So what can you suggest for me? But we've got a strategy. The teacher is ready to go. They know what they want to goal is, they know their strategy. Then in the learning stage, we sit down and we help the teacher get ready to implement. And so that sometimes means I have a ready-made checklist we go through, and I say, how do you want to modify this? And we don't have to do it this way. And the teacher, since we have a goal, the teacher can do whatever they want, implement it however they want. Sometimes we co-construct a checklist because this thing is something we're figuring out together. And then they need to see it in action. So it might be watching a video. I might go in the classroom. We might co-teach. Might be that we watch another teacher. But somehow, usually people will say, you know, help me if I could see somebody do this before I have to do it. So you describe it, you model it. And that's the learning stage. At the end of the learning stage, the teacher's ready to go. They're ready to implement. They've seen it. They understand it. They think they can do it. Then they try it out, and it usually doesn't work. And so then you make modifications. And there's only a few things you could do. You can wait. You can say it hasn't worked yet, but it's going to work. You can modify how you use it. You can change the strategy. You can change the goal. You can change how you measure progress towards the goal. But often the first time through takes some work. And so you might use video in that part too, where the person's got a checklist they're looking at. Let's say it's again, I do it, we do it, you do it. You know, they've got a video, they're going to look at their practice, they're going to compare it to the checklist, or maybe it's reader's workshop or writer's workshop, whatever the practice might be. And you keep going till you hit the goal. That's the improvement stage. Really, it's adaptive. It's the adapting stage is what's happening. You're making adaptations till you hit the goal.
When you have a teacher who's met the goal, do you continue the cycle? Someone just asked, or does it just end the,
maybe,
you know?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we believe strongly that you have to have not just achievement goals, but also engagement goals. Well, this may be a little different in the international school environment, but engagement, there's 3 different kinds of engagement. So there's behavioral engagement. Kids look like they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Cognitive engagement, they're getting out of the experience what the teacher wanted them to get out of it. But emotional engagement means I have friends in school. I feel like I belong here. I feel like I'm doing what I'm best at. You know, I feel connected to the school, emotionally engaged in the school. So that's one set of goals. Then there's another set of goals, which is achievement goals. You know, the kid can't write a paragraph, now he can write a paragraph, or whatever it might be. We've clearly articulated, maybe there's a rubric for what it's supposed to look like. Might be a simple single factor rubric, but we can say what it is. So sometimes the first goal you set ends up being an engagement goal, because the person looks at the video and they go, oh, that's got to change. I can't believe how much time we're wasting here, or the kids look bored, or whatever. But then after you hit the engagement goal, you want to go to an achievement goal. And sometimes once you hit an achievement goal, you set another kind of achievement goal you want to go after. So there's no end of the ongoing learning you could do. You could always set another goal for improvement.
Right.
But the challenge is maybe you don't have time, or how many teachers do you have to meet in the whole school year? So the real constraint would be what the teacher's doing. Like if the teacher's about to teach tennis, coach the tennis team, they might say, let's just take a break for a while. So you can either pick another goal. Sometimes you keep working on a practice. So the teacher's really integrated cooperative learning, but they really don't feel they've got it down, so they want to keep working on it. And sometimes you set another goal. Set another goal, take a break, or get better at a practice is usually your 3 options,
Someone just asked about the role of the instructional coach with the teacher's end of year evaluation. And at times they feel there's a conflict when they have to then work with the principal. What are your suggestions in terms of the role of the instructional coach and that type of evaluation at the end of a school year for a teacher?
Yeah, I think that's where role clarity becomes important. So, so we see a coach as a peer, and peers aren't really evaluative. And when you're evaluating somebody, you're comparing them against a standard. You know, say maybe it's whatever it might be, Danielson's framework for effective instruction or something. So that's the first thing. And so if I'm a coach, I'm not evaluating. I'm providing support. And we would say it needs to be a goal that's set by the teacher. The research is really clear. Other people's goals for us aren't ones we really embrace. Like if Jenny came back from her retreat that she's on right now on Monday, and she said, Jim, you know, I've been thinking about you, and she said, I really think you need to go on this diet. Here's this diet. I've got it all worked out for you. This is what you're going to eat from now on, because you need to lose weight. So here's my goal for you. I wouldn't really, I wouldn't be as motivated as if I came to that realization on my own.
Yourself, yeah.
And so we would say we need a goal that's chosen by the teacher, a powerful goal. And we would say, if the goal is chosen external to the person, if they're just told what to do, you're not going to get commitment. You might get compliance. But in particular, DC and Ryan's research, but it's all summarized nicely in Dan Pink's book, Drive.
Absolutely.
You know, when you don't give people, and I'm not saying we're going to focus on an inappropriate goal, If the teacher picks something that I think is a waste of time, I'm going to say, I think that's a waste of time. But,
Right.
but we're going to work it out together, one professional to another. I think telling people what their goal is makes sense if what they're doing is simple work like stocking the shelves in a department store.
Right.
But if you have the complex professional work of helping students learn and feel safe and be inspired, there aren't really quick recipes. It's not that simple.
I love just your sentence, one professional to another. We only have 3 minutes left. So Jim, do you have any, just some final last thoughts before we go?
I think we need to be honest about what works and what doesn't work. And I think, our kids deserve it. And not that you have to just say, okay, we're going to just throw all the budget into something we haven't seen any evidence, but I think you need to experiment. And I think workshops are helpful. They provide awareness, but unless the learning is grounded in real life, unless it's driven by the perceptions and desires of teachers, it's not likely going to work. We have lots and lots of, I think over 1 million copies of Marzano's Art and Science of Teaching have been sold. And that's a really good book. It's filled with really good ideas. But I see them on the walls in lots of places. And Marzano's working on this too, because he's got a book on coaching. But, I see lots of people who've got the books, but they aren't actually doing the learning. And the coach is a necessary person to make the learning become real. So I think we can't deceive ourselves by saying things like, well, if I get one good thing from a workshop, I feel it's not a waste of time. No, we should really, if we're going to all come together, we really need work. And the other thing is, a continuous model of telling teachers what to do is not very motivating. But if you give teachers some voice and some control over what they do, they will blow you away. This group that's coming together on Thursday nights at 7:30, 70 people who probably want to be with their families, and they're all creating this playbook. Why? Just because they think it's going to be helpful for other teachers to have this remote. Well, that's a lot of people who volunteered for like a month of time. So
the passion.
So I think we want to treat teachers as professionals. I think that's the big thing too.
Oh, what a lovely way to end. 1 minute left, Shonald. Jim, this is just the chats. Everyone's saying